Hello and welcome to Module 6. We are almost at the finish line. I know it feels like you will never see the end of your sweater, but I promise you will, and you're getting so close. If you've been working along with us and trying to keep up with the modules, then you should be about ready to work on your sleeves. If you've already cruised right past that point, great. We don't have a lot to cover this week, but I just wanted to touch on a couple of quick things, and we'll talk a little bit more about the history and how that relates to the sleeve style. But pretty much we're at the home stretch. So congratulations, great work, and hopefully you survived that massive sea of cables. I know it seemed like it was never going to end, but I will tell you something. Wearing that sweater when it's finished is going to feel amazing. I happened to hear through the grapevine that someone who finished her sweater wore it to work and was told that it looked like she went out and got some retail therapy. And the truth is, she didn't go buy it off the rack. She made it. And that's a pretty awesome feeling when it looks so spectacular. It looks like you bought it at the store. Now, we know when people tell us, "Oh, did you buy that?" It sort of feels like an insult because we put so much work into it and it didn't come off the store shelf. But at the same time, it's a really significant compliment from someone who doesn't understand knitting because it doesn't look homemade. It just looks so professional. That's pretty awesome, don't you think? So this week we're focusing on our sleeves. That's really the next hurdle, so to speak. And there's not a lot to it. You have a one-stitch edge that goes all the way around the arm that you can use sort of as your guide. You can either pick up traditionally by going underneath that stitch just the way that you normally would pick up, or you can use that stitch if you've taken classes with me and you know about my picking up one leg method. You can use that and just pick up one leg of the stitch all the way around. It's totally up to you how you pick up. One thing I want to recommend is when you're trying to figure out how to break up the number of stitches that you're picking up around the sleeve, remember that you have two hemispheres. So you have, if we break the sleeve in half from top to bottom and we split it right down the center, let's say we're picking up 100 stitches. That's not a number I'm taking from the pattern. I'm just throwing that out there. But if we're picking up 100 stitches and the sleeve, we're splitting the sleeve right down the center, then we're going to try and get 50 around this side and 50 around this side. So I like to put markers on the bottom center and the top center of the sleeve so that I can sort of space evenly the number of stitches that I'm picking up as I go to work the sleeve. This is also an area where there's a little bit of wiggle room. So if you have smaller arms and you want to pick up just a few less stitches, you can. Or if you're worried that the sleeve measurement might be a little snug for you because your arms are a little bit more generous, you can squeeze in a few extras. So there's some wiggle room there, and that's something for you to navigate yourself. Like, just go with the number that the pattern says, divide them equally on either hemisphere of the sleeve, or decide if you want to get a few extra or a few less. That's up to you. Easy breezy, nothing too complicated. After you finish that giant mountain of cables, the sleeves are going to feel like a breeze and you're going to whip right through them. It will be the best sleeve experience of your life because it will feel so fast. It may be the one time that you've knit a sweater where it will not feel like Sleeve Island, which is pretty darn cool if you ask me. So back in one of our previous modules, we kind of talked a little bit about the history of Ganseys and how there was symbolism in the motifs and the textures that were part of the traditional Dutch Ganseys. And one of the things that I mentioned, and I just thought I would kind of mention again, is the fact that the motifs and the texture were really symbolic of not just things in their lives, but also of an income level, because it cost more money to put more texture and cables and stitch definition into the sweater. So having stockinette on the sleeves and having stockinette on that lower portion of the body was really an economical decision, and that was important to help them stretch the yarn as far as they could go. So they kept those textured stitches and those motifs in the parts of the body that needed the warmth the most. That's part of why I kept true to that when I went to the sleeves, and I didn't throw more cables onto the sleeves, which I bet you're thanking me for right about now. You're welcome. But also it was partly to stay true to that original Dutch Gansey concept, which was to not overwhelm the amount of yarn usage by adding more texture on the sleeves. So motifs, in addition to being more expensive, they also did have some important symbolism. And fishing was a very dangerous profession. It was also really like the primary profession for most of the people in the Netherlands at the time period that these were really popular. And so I think if you think about the time period and you think about the struggles and the stress and the endurance that was required, it makes sense that they really did feel a really close connection to the symbolism that was part of their Gansey sweater. So those motifs would represent things like religion, the sea, daily life, fishing, things related to fishing, things related to weather and the area in which they lived. So each Gansey was very personal, and I think that's what created that really intimate connection that the fishermen felt with their individual Ganseys. And I think for you, as you've been working through it and you've put so much heart and soul into all those cables and into choosing your yarn, I think you can probably feel a little bit of that personal connection with your sweater too. But imagine if you were putting in your own sort of motifs and designs that represented something very personal to you, and then that might kind of give you an idea of why they felt such a close connection to these sweaters and they were so proud of them and really pretty attached to them. Another thing I really love about taking a more historic, if that's the right word, approach to thinking about our sweaters and the way that we wear them and the way that we use them. If you've ever heard the saying, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without, I grew up with a pretty traditional grandma who mentioned that saying to me many times, and it really made me think about being practical and the idea of reuse and taking care of the things that we have. And the fishermen in the Netherlands who wore these Ganseys and really made them their own really did have to make do, or they would do without, because it wasn't easy to just come by a new sweater. That wasn't practical. So there you would often see patching, and they would bring in other kinds of yarn because often you couldn't get the same color of yarn again. It wasn't commercialized like it is now. So there'd be patches on the cuffs and elbows where it would wear out much more quickly. And those patched pieces wouldn't often match exactly, and sometimes not match at all. But it wasn't the purpose necessarily of how it looked. It was the fact that it was a practical, useful garment that they needed. I was at a garment exhibit in London at the Victoria and Albert Museum last year, and I saw this really beautiful exhibit about mended sweaters, and it really inspired me to see people wearing these mended sweaters, and you could absolutely see the different colors of yarn and the patches and the worn spots, and there was something so satisfying and so kind of enchanting in a way about it, because it made me think about what a throwaway society we're in and how easy it is for us to buy something and wear it and let it go, and we don't have that close personal connection to our clothing anymore. And what a gift it is for us as knitters to create a garment that becomes part of us and this expression of ourselves and our creativity. And then after you've worn it and it starts to wear out, you don't necessarily want to let go of it as easily as you might something that you got from the store. So the idea of patching and fixing is really quite sweet, and I love the idea that these Ganseys down the road, we may get opportunities to do a little bit of mending, and not necessarily to see that as a bad thing, maybe to do it in an artful way. So really the most important thing for this week is just to cheer you on a little bit, encourage you to keep going, and remind you that the end is close. You are so close. Keep going, keep up the good work, and before you know it, you're going to have a finished sweater. We will see you here next week for the next module.